There you go. That could be your $1 million hack.
This will be good. So we didn't have a talk like this last year.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's.
It kind of tries to bring it together.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of times you're working on the sort of early stage business plan.
Yeah.
And it becomes so much attention on the business plan document, and this really tries to step back and go, here are the main things you got to worry about at different stages of development.
Yeah. No, that's
and
a
then
good
depending on who you are, what stage you're at. Lots of negotiating.
Yeah, I think that the students will like really benefit from this talk.
Yeah, these are busy ones. I remember talking to him back like at least 5 years ago, I think, when they were first going through the planning. That was their patent issue into that. They realized that early on that Apple had some IP and they did something about it. They were at least aware of it at that point in time. And it looks like they changed the whole concept because they were originally trying to have every single outlet replaced so that it was the outlet was the issue. So you'd actually have a different thing that would just connect to. But now it looks like they have a traditional plug, and then the traditional plug has got the magnet that goes into your vehicle, which just makes tons more sense than to try to change infrastructure everywhere. Yeah, it's neat when you hear the early concept and then you see someone kind of figure it out. I need to test this before I put it in my pocket. It's on. It says it's on. Okay, that's good. Jinxed me. Sure. Yep.
I'm debating if we should actually create more online content for the entrepreneurship classes in
Okay.
university, and then like in the future we offer to people like even more smaller more community, so you don't have to come back to all the time.
That's a good idea.
So yeah, like then like in those situations, you don't call that part of that.
Right. Okay, and all this stuff here, address and everything.
Yeah, like if you want to.
Yeah.
First, so we want to. One more week. 3, 2.
Okay, I think we're good.
Yeah, I was thinking like if we do it more material related than animal, right?
Maybe I could, we could speak for a couple minutes so that we can provide some context.
I put a link up at the end to the Innovation Enterprise Summer Entrepreneurship Program, just in case anyone's interested in applying. I was just talking with Amit today about their next aim day, and mentioned I was coming over. He says, "Yeah, you should mention this to them." Already applied. Okay, good. Yeah, one more time. Yeah. So is the room going to be full, jammed to the back? People standing on each other's shoulders? It's getting toward the end of term, maybe not, right? Yeah, the next one's in March, they hope, on plant proteins. It's going to be the topic, yeah. Uh-huh. Right. Yeah. They need more of that. They need enough to make a full team. So I know last year when the students themselves were just trying to match themselves up. I'm like, you need the three, right? You need the research person, the marketing person, and then kind of the CEO / finance kind of person, as part of a 3-person team.
Okay, so I'll start with the introduction. So naturally have David here. He's like really a veteran like in the financing world and the entrepreneurship world like in Collins. So we're very lucky to have him here. David and I know each other. I think when I had met him like a number of years back, we were designing packaging line for the boxes, and then once I met him, Dave, I think like I realized quickly like how little I know about this. So even when we were running it, and then so like that set me on like into the course afterwards. Without further ado, thank you all.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome. Thanks everyone for coming out tonight. Maybe I'll just give you a little bit of my background so you can understand how I kind of got here. So I started out as an academic, got a PhD in biology from Queen's University. Decided that I really didn't want to be a professor, so I went and did an MBA. And then coincidentally, right at the end of my MBA, ended up working with 2 of my previous professors at Queen's who had just created a startup company in plant biotechnology. That company was based in Kingston, Ontario, but had an office out here in Saskatoon. So I got to get to know the community a little bit, sort of right from the get-go as soon as I got into the business world. It was really interesting because having understood the science and then sort of had the, educational part of an MBA, it was really neat to go into a startup company where I understood the science, yet all I was worried about was business plans, raising venture capital, doing corporate deals, learning how to manage an IP portfolio and do all of that other stuff that I wouldn't have got to do had I gone and just worked for a large company right away. So it gave me a really good holistic view of what happens in a startup company that I think I was very fortunate to get. 3 years into that job, I got headhunted into a new venture capital fund that was being set up in Guelph, Ontario, basically to invest in early stage agricultural technologies. So I joined Foragent in, 3 years later. I won't tell you the dates because then you'll know why I have so much gray hair, but went and joined this venture capital fund based in Guelph. And we were investing in really early stage technologies. So in many cases, we were licensing the technology out of a university, creating the startup around it, and we were actually acting as management for a period of time until we could bring in a full-time management team and raise future rounds of investment. So by doing that, I got yet a different perspective on business. Now when you're an investor, you're looking at a business in a completely different way, evaluating it in a different way, trying to bring some rationality to the whole thing rather than if you're inside a company where, oh yeah, our company is great, we're going to make you $1 zillion. It was nice to have that other perspective. Then, as we started to wind down that fund, I decided to move out to Saskatoon. Both the fund and Performance Plants had offices out here. I had a good network. So I came out and I joined the National Research Council as the regional director for their IRAP program. So IRAP provides funding for research and development in all stages of companies, from the early stages right up to quite successful and large companies. So again, I got the sort of government perspective on investing in research and development, and it also kind of got me out of my agricultural cocoon a little bit and understood a bit of what was happening in IT companies and manufacturing companies and all sorts of other sectors that I wasn't aware of before. From there, I pivoted into an organization called the Entrepreneurial Foundation of Saskatchewan. It was a not-for-profit, originally linked to a $50 million growth and expansion fund that was set up by the credit union system in Saskatchewan, plus a provincial crown called Crown Investments Corporation. And we were the not-for-profit that found the deals, did the diligence on them, gave them advice, and kind of worked up the investment documents for the fund, which was managed by one of the labor-sponsored funds down in Regina. So I did that for about 3 years, and that's where a lot of sort of these slides and thinking came from, because we were, I'd like to refer to us as friendly dragons, right? So companies could come in, pitch their ideas to us. We weren't going to laugh at them or kick them out of the room. We were just going to listen honestly to their story, give them the best advice that we possibly could on how to raise financing. As that wound down, I was a consultant for about 5 years, working with our angel network in Saskatchewan, helping companies get ready for their pitches, getting ready for the diligence process. Worked for about 1.5 years with the Economic Development Agency, had various acting positions with Genome Prairie on the boards of AgWest Bio and Genome Prairie both for a while before joining Natural Products Canada. So we are very similar to the Entrepreneurial Foundation. We are a not-for-profit, but we also have our own private investment fund. So it's a very powerful combination for economic development when you look at every opportunity through the cold, objective eyes of an investor. And through doing that, it's very easy to identify the gaps in the business. Then the not-for-profit side of your business can come to bear to help them fill those gaps. So, and we're back kind of in the agricultural sector in terms of natural products. So that gives you a little bit of my twisted history, but I've made a lot of mistakes. I've seen a lot of mistakes. And again, I think I've seen investment from so many different points of view that hopefully I have something of value to share with you guys tonight. So I just want to say a couple of words about the business plan. Now, my understanding is you guys are not creating a full business plan through this course. It's more of like a concept document. Is that right? So you're looking at an idea, trying to do some early validation. That's still a business plan, and it's kind of the right business plan for the stage of development that you're at. But I think, too many business planning courses or educational courses focus too much on a document, right? It's a template document, fill it in, and then congratulations, you're an entrepreneur, go get money, go create your business. Well, that's not what it's all about. Business planning is a never-ending process. You never stop doing it. You never stop growing. The business plan document is something you just need periodically when you need to accomplish something, like you need a bank loan. And a banker is going to need to see a very different type of a business plan than the one that you will take to an angel investor or a venture capitalist or to a company for a partnership. So just to make sure that you understand that, writing a business plan isn't the end of it. Business planning is a continuous process throughout the lifespan of your company. And you can kind of break down your development into a number of stages. Different models have different number of stages. It doesn't really matter, but essentially people can agree that there's sort of these major milestones that you need to overcome at a different stage in order to be able to move to the next stage. Okay, so when you start out at your pre-seed stage, it's all about the idea. Then you have to go from the idea to a feasible plan. Then you can become a startup company. Then you can start to become an established competitor. then become profitable, and then hopefully become a market global leader on the other side. But you can't get from here to here until your skills have developed. So either you've developed them as an entrepreneur, or you bring in the team or other expertise to help you get to that next step. And what we found in dealing with a lot of our clients at the Entrepreneurial Foundation is parts of their business looked like they were here, but other parts of their business were still down here. And they were talking to investors who were looking for this kind of company, but they only had a few elements of that kind of company, and the rest of it was back here. So we created a whole set of diagnostic tools that an entrepreneur can go through and essentially assess themselves. And then they would know whether or not their company was lacking in certain aspects, like, financial expertise or technical expertise or knowing how to build a board, whatever it was. And then through that assessment tool, we can kind of help fill in those gaps. So you probably can't read this. I'll leave a copy of the slides so you guys don't have to jot it all down. But essentially, this is how it goes. And so you guys are really at the pre-seed stage right now. You're just trying to do whatever you can as cheaply as possible to find out, is this like the stupidest idea that anyone's ever had? Is there something to it? I've asked people, what do they think of it? And they're telling me, well, yeah, that might be cool, but could it also do this? Could it do something else? Have you done like any measure of patent searches, or look through the web for potential competitors? Has someone else already done this? And if you think it's a good idea, can you actually manufacture it and kind of get a product developed and be able to meet the cost expectations, that customer might have? So it's really trying to not so much even prove it. I would say the right approach at that stage is, I got to find the thing that can kill this idea as quickly and as cheaply as possible. And if I keep on don't find that answer, and every time I try to kill it, it's not killed, then you have a pretty good, rationale for then moving into the next step. But you don't want to spend a lot of money at this. I've seen companies where people have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, put their life savings into this, turned down all kinds of good opportunities for something that the market just does not want, and it's just not feasible to get there. At the seed stage, that's about where you get kind of formal about the whole business planning process. You might be spending some money to bring some consultants in to help you out, get everything kind of wrapped up and ready to go to become an early stage company. When you're an early stage company, it's important to, before you start growing too quickly, to bring some formality to your business. And this is the reason why most companies fail. The stats are like 80% of companies fail in their first 5 years. And the reason is that they're not ready to transition from the early stage into the growth stage. If you enter the growth stage and you're still operating very informally, you have no processes or procedures, you get wiped out because you're hiring 10 people a month and you're trying to keep up with your bills and you don't know how to handle that, right? So think about it. If you start hiring staff and someone's going to want to go on maternity leave at some point in time, you got to know what you're going to do when they knock on your office door and say, I want to leave. So you got to go through that transition at this stage to be ready for that stage, because this one's crazy. And if you're not ready, that's when your company actually can die. So it's also the hardest part when you're trying to coach an entrepreneur through that, because many of the entrepreneurs are technically oriented and they can get to the company to a certain point, and they either have to change the way they think about the business and become a true CEO, which means now delegating the technology, delegating other elements of the business, or they have to step aside and let somebody else come in and be the CEO to kind of move it forward. So we spend a lot of time with the entrepreneurs to try to help them assess their skill set at this stage and to make sure that they're not getting in their own way of the company being successful as they grow. Then if you can get through that growth stage, that crazy stage where you're just trying to keep up with everything, and eventually you become cash flow positive, you got lots of customers, you're continually growing, then you can get into what we call the expansion stage. So it's like growth, but it's more of a, you're doing it on purpose, right? So you've sort of, maxed out the Canadian market, and now you're strategically looking to open a new market internationally, or you're strategically looking to add a new product line and sort of invest in that new product line. So that's what we call expansion. And then you could become a mature company where you're a multinational, you know, you've got lots of products coming in, lots of new products being developed, and life is good. But this is the key one, early stage to growth stage. Okay, so now I was invited to talk about financing, so now we're finally getting to that. So the capital plan is part of the business plan, okay? And it's very similar to the business plan in sense that you got to look forward. You got to think about what different kinds of capital you're going to need as you grow, and how that capital can support your business, okay? So in the early stages, your business is primarily funded by yourself, your friends and family. You might have a rich aunt that can kind of help you out. Might be some government grants that can help you out if you're more of an R&D kind of a business. Maybe some small loans if you're willing to put your house up as security on that kind of thing. So there are ways of kind of getting by at the earlier stages. But if you are the kind of company that is going to grow and get into $10, $15, $20 million in revenue, you're probably going to need other external different kinds of financing to move that forward. And again, you need to understand those various forms of capital, because if you don't and you just sort of dip your toes in it and you only have a certain amount of money to get you so far, you're probably going to fail, okay? And part of that is developing your financial literacy. So a study was done in Manitoba by the Women Enterprise Center, and the data showed that both men and women are bad at financial literacy as entrepreneurs, but for different reasons. So most of the male entrepreneurs were bad because they just managed their finances by what was in the bank, right? Wasn't very strategic. And a lot of the women entrepreneurs didn't understand it because they were afraid of numbers. So this isn't sexist. This is what the data actually showed, that women were intimidated by financing and were more likely to delegate financial responsibility to an accountant or somebody else. The problem is you can't make decisions on only getting a quarterly statement from your accountant. You need to be able to look at your projections and your statements on a weekly, daily, some regular basis so that you can make informed decisions. The big difference between the men and the women entrepreneurs is once the women entrepreneurs understood that, they would dramatically outpace their male counterparts by being educated and becoming financially literate themselves. So we created a whole bunch of tools that were specifically focused at trying to get the women entrepreneurs in Manitoba financially literate, which is a very crazy thing to do because you can't say, come out to a financial literacy course, because they won't show up because they're intimidated by it. So we positioned it as a how to grow your company. And then in the first lecture, we talked about the importance of financial literacy and kind of eased them into it. So it's important. It's important for everybody. So the whole goal really of a business plan and of capital planning and business planning is to be able to draw this curve for your company. So this is a basic cash flow curve. And the financial projections that you'll eventually produce as part of the business plan really is all about trying to articulate, this curve. And so, in the early days, you're going to be consuming capital. You'll be consuming it for a point in time. Then hopefully you start generating revenue and more revenue. And eventually you hit this point where now you've actually generated as much revenue as you've consumed. And then you're a real company. You've hit that break-even point and you're actually starting to make money. You only really become a company there. And then hopefully you're in the positive from there on afterwards. And the keys to understand is how long is that in time? How deep is that? And then how big can that get on the other side, right? And depending on the shape of that curve really depends and dictates your capital future. So I became a consultant in 2012. I needed a new cell phone, a new computer. $800 on my credit card and I'm up and running, right? There was no more cost. So that was a really easy thing for me to finance, and I was kind of, profitable in 5 minutes, essentially, once I had my first contract, right? If you're developing a pharmaceutical, that's maybe 12 years, maybe $1 billion deep, okay? And then that better be 20 billion on the other side in order to make all of that worthwhile. Okay, and then lots of stuff in between. So you really need to understand that. So you can't just look a week in advance or 2 weeks in advance and try to think about how much money is it going to take in order to continue to pay the bills and pay my staff at the end of the month. You got to look at what it's going to take to get you through to that point. Because if you can't see that point, you don't know how to get there, no one's going to give you money because they're just throwing it into this pit, into this big valley. If we have to map out different kinds of investors, in the early days, it's government grants, potentially friends, family, your own sweat equity into the business. Around this stage, that's where angels or venture capital might come in after you've kind of gotten to that point and you've actually started getting some of those sales. So even though you might be consuming more money than you're generating, at least you're in market. And that's where angels and venture capitalists can come in. You might get commercial partners as part of your growth plan, more venture capital potentially depending on the kind of company you are. And then you've hit the break-even point, and then there's lots of ways of financing sort of day-to-day cash flow once you're revenue positive through lines of credit, etc. Okay? All right, so just like in the business plan, your capital planning activities change over time. And again, you don't have to read all that. I'll leave the slides. And actually, I'm not even going to spend much time on this, but essentially it goes from a very high-level planning to at every stage doing more validation of your business model, eventually generating a dynamic forecasting model to predict into the future, et cetera, et cetera. So it just gets more complex as you move forward. Okay, so now we'll switch into, now you sort of have the background of why it's important. Let's talk about investors and what they're actually looking for, okay? The only thing they care about is getting the right return for the risk that they're assuming by investing in your business, okay? So their entire diligence process is about understanding those two variables with as much precision as possible so that then they can make their final decision, is this investment worth it? So unfortunately, the dynamic that's set up is the entrepreneur is always trying to underestimate the risks and overestimate the value. And the investor on the other side is doing the opposite. They're trying to look at every risk under the sun and not see the value in your company right off the bat. So that's the dynamic. That dynamic is not going to change. But the only way of making it work is how you, the entrepreneur, understands and reacts to that dynamic. Some people like pictures, I do, so this is going to try to describe it, what I actually mean by all of that. So this is that sort of appropriate balance of risk and reward that I was talking about. If you're sort of on this side, so there's lots of return on the investment, very low risk, that would be a super hot deal. If you're down here, it's a high risk and there's not a very high potential return, there's going to be no deal done. Or somebody who's investing in you has to have a different motivation than just return on investment. And in the middle, this is not linear, it's amorphous because there is room, there is a negotiation range in here somewhere where you can actually set the true value, okay? So here's where all the different investors kind of line up on that continuum. So banks, we know that they take very low risk, and for that they get a fairly low return. Angel investors can be anywhere on the continuum. Angels are not one and the same. They can only invest, some of them in early stage opportunities, others can invest in later stage opportunities, etc. The reason that I have them on both sides of this is because some angels may be investing for reasons other than just return on investment. They might be rich already, they're looking to give back to the community, they like you, they want to see you succeed, same as your family and your friends. You know, your mother loves you, she doesn't care if she loses the money, that's why she might invest there. And government grants also take a lot of risk. They're not looking for necessarily return on investment, they want to stimulate economic growth, they know it's a risky game. They just don't want to get their name in the newspaper for making a bad deal in something that's illegal. An angel can also take you to this side just because they have experience in an industry, same as with a commercial partner, they may actually be able to de-risk your investment opportunity by participating in it because they have that expertise to bring to bear. And then you have sort of the various rounds of venture capital. The earlier stage is the most risky down to things that are more moderately risky. Okay? So now this sets up the dynamic. If you as the company are trying to pull investors in this direction into happy land, where there's no risk and lots of return, they're pulling back on this horizon, but they're also pushing down here. And there's no one pushing back at them here. So there's nothing to stop them. They're going in that direction and you're going in that direction. So you're not having a discussion about the same thing. That's not a very good dynamic when you're talking to somebody to be going in opposite directions. So a disciplined company works from this side of the horizon. You understand all the risks. You're honest about the risks. You're honest about what could go wrong. And you've come up with all kinds of contingency plans to help them see that you've done all that you can, and chances are you can work your way through the next few years. So at least in that case, you're having a discussion about the same thing. And that's a better, it's going to go back and forth, but that's a better way of forging a relationship than if you're going in two different directions. Okay, so yeah, I got twice in there, that's fine. So again, just to summarize, best way of increasing perception of risk is to pretend it doesn't exist and be unprepared for it. Best way to reduce it is to acknowledge it, understand it, develop strategies to deal with it. When you're making your initial pitch, it's kind of a hard sell, but it's when you have those follow-on discussions, you have to be prepared to talk about all the things that could potentially go wrong as well. So now shifting to how different investors actually perceive risk and look at risk. For the big public markets, it's all about growth, right? So the stock markets are all based on which companies can meet or exceed its growth projections to provide more value for them. For venture capitalists, it's all about liquidity, right? So tell me when I'm going to get my check back, and tell me that it's going to be 10 times what I put in, and that better happen in 5 years. That's essentially the way they're looking at it. So they have a time horizon and they have a return expectation. Government grants, it's all about, does it fit with your program? Is there any risk to my, mandate in my program if something goes wrong? Yourself, family and friends, it might be financial risk. Can you really afford it? And definitely some emotional risk, right? So your mom wants to see you succeed, and she'd feel bad if you fail. There's different elements of risk that go into that. Corporations, if you want to do a deal with a company, license your technology, partner with them as a distributor. For them, it's all about the competitive risk. So if I don't invest with you, is my competitor going to get that deal and be able to outcompete me at that level? Or if I get it, can I outcompete my competitor? That's the way that they look at it. And angels could be any of those things because they're just people who are rich that have money that invest for all kinds of different reasons. Okay, so I've already said investors fund different things. And again, I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail. It's just one way of breaking it down. So by investor, these kinds of investors invest in certain kinds of activities that you might be involved with, and you can also do a time sort of dimension to this, that different funders also align with different stages of development. So again, you can read that through later in the slides for all of that detail that I won't go through. Because I'm going to talk about now the different kinds of risk capital and provide some more clarity around that. So two basic kinds of investment out there in the world. There's kind of the debt world, and then there's the equity world. Debt's pretty common. Everyone understands what debt is. Could be a term debt that you'd be applying for based on assets that you have as collateral. Very low interest rates on that. And then we get into the private equity zone. Subordinated debt is a little bit of both, okay? So it's kind of debt-like, but the banks still have first charge on assets. These guys might get a little bit left over if they can. If things go wrong, they might be able to convert their debt into equity, which is why it kind of fits into the private equity world. And the interest rates tend to be quite a bit higher because they don't have that security of assets backing it. So probably the best example of subordinated debt is a credit card, right? So you buy a TV on your credit card. If you don't make the payments on the credit card, they don't take your TV back, but they do charge you 20% interest on a month on payments to, because overall they want to be safe that they're not going to be losing their money. So a credit card is really kind of an example of subordinated debt. And then we're into the real equity world where people are actually buying a portion of your company and owning a portion of your company and essentially becoming partners with you through different kinds of equity. And there's no end of different types of equity and bells and whistles that can go around an equity transaction. You don't have to worry about that today. But essentially the difference is they are investing in you and they're becoming a partner and expect to share in all of those profits down the road. Okay, so looking at the debt life cycle, there's a valley of death there in the early stages where banks don't really play a large role unless you're willing to put personal assets up as collateral, and more debt can become available down the road. Unfortunately, the private equity cycle also has the same valley of death in the early stages, and more becomes available as your company grows. So what are you to do? What are the options? So back to the old family, friends, and angels, right? So if you're looking for $100,000 or less, this might be the way that you get started. This is the way most companies get started. It's your own investment. Your aunts and your uncles are in there, but also sometimes your business associates, right? So you can start working with lawyers and accountants as early as possible in your life cycle. They may take a shine to you, so they might be part friends and family, as well as part angel investor, right? So good source of capital there. Angels, as I mentioned, are hard to define, but they're more commonly becoming organized, almost like small venture capital funds. So the lone wolf angel, although there's lots of them out there, good luck finding them. There's no lone wolf angel directory in the phone book. So unless you already know one, to spend time and effort just to try to find someone randomly who is rich and will invest in your business is very, very hard. But there are more and more angel syndicates being developed, and they are acting more professionally like angel investors in terms of their diligence, their document preparation, etc. And that's a good thing, because I've seen some of these lone wolf angels do stupid things when it comes to documentation, like not having the right terms or any kind of legal protections around it. So someone operating on their own might do your business a disservice when it comes to the later stage financing by kind of messing up, the shareholders' agreements and other documents that should be in place. And they can do anything. I mean, really at that stage, sometimes a debt instrument is okay. In many cases, it's equity. In other cases, it's called a convertible debenture. So it starts out as debt, but under certain triggers can be converted into an equity instrument down the road. The only advantage of that is it saves people from going through a valuation exercise in the early days. It waits for the later round, more sophisticated investors to come in and actually do a proper valuation and set the actual share price of your company. Banks and financial institutions, been over this already. They want to loan based on assets until you become cash flow positive. Once you have a history of accounts receivable, cash flow, there might be shorter term loans that you might be able to set up that don't require guarantees of assets. Strategic alliances, I talked a little bit about that. It could be anyone really in your value chain that could want to also partner with you and invest in your business. people that are supplying you with materials that you need, people who are taking it from you and processing it, the distribution system can all be there to potentially invest in you. Plus, they can bring other things to the table in addition to the capital. We see this an awful lot with consumer packaged goods companies that approach us. They're trying to get manufacturers to take them on, doing small batches, and that's very, very difficult. But with the Walmarts and the Costcos out there in the world now, there's a lot of manufacturing companies who are willing to work with their customers and give them better payment terms so that they actually might be able to get paid by Costco or Walmart before they have to pay the manufacturer. So you're starting to see that more and more because the Walmarts and the Costcos and the Whole Foods are really becoming the dominant sort of bricks and mortar players. And everyone in the value chain has to adjust to that. Sometimes licensing your technology is the only way to go, right? So if it is going to take $100 million to build that manufacturing facility to produce that product that you have some IP around, it may be impossible for you to ever raise that much capital. So you might have to license that technology to an existing manufacturer or to a company that has the wherewithal and capability to get it to market. That's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of inventors. They want to be the person running the $100 million company and make everything out of it rather than trying to share it and taking a small percentage of it on the other side. So we try to do a lot of work with inventors where we try to help them see the options. You license it off, you don't give it away. You have a good solid licensing agreement, but now you just continue to do what you want to do and you just wait for the checks to kind of roll in down the road. Sometimes bundling different technologies together is a better way to go. So if you have some colleagues who are working in a similar area and you can actually see a product portfolio coming together, then you can have synergies in terms of the management and all of that sort of thing just by bringing different things together. And then finally, sales and bootstrapping. Hey, revenues are a good source of money and capital coming into your company as well. And sometimes that's the only way to go. You got to be really careful on your financial analysis and managing your cash flow. Sometimes you can convince customers to prepay you. Sometimes you can convince the people you need to pay to give you better terms, extend it to 90 days, etc. Sometimes you can get professional advice and accounting support and things like that in return for an equity position in your company. So if you don't have money to hire that accountant, you can offer them a few percentage points and then maybe they become interested in your company. Maybe they could be an investor down the road. Make sure you maximize whatever you can out of government grants and tax credits, and survive as long as you possibly can until you have some credibility in the market to open up the doors for other sources of financing. Oh yeah, crowdfunding. So 2013 data was something I pulled out for this presentation, so it's obviously been a while, but there hasn't been much updates on that other than they expect crowdfunding to reach $1 trillion in just a few years. So I don't know a lot about it, but obviously everyone knows about Kickstarter and GoFundMe now. It's a very, very popular way for a lot of people to raise money. It came out of the sort of micro-lending world, which was really more of a charity, benevolent kind of an exercise, and then sort of got twisted into giving entrepreneurs money. So you probably know some of them work on you're basically prepaying for a product that they're promising you in the future. At a few jurisdictions, they allow equity crowdfunding now. And some people have raised a fair bit of money. If you want to work with 702 individual investors, that becomes a nightmare sometimes in terms of managing things going forward. But it is a potential way of raising money early on. I'd say if that's the way you want to go, do it sooner rather than later, because the more it happens, the more regulators are going to step in and start regulating it. And so right now, these platforms, by and large, don't do a lot of diligence on the companies. Anyone can list. what happens if you take the money and do something else with it? Do you have to pay back all those people that gave you $100 to buy that product? It's very, still in murky waters. So I see the future of crowdfunding being more of a blend of traditional private equity combined with an IT platform to get more investors involved. And that means that they'll be doing more due diligence on their companies. They'll be able to promise the people that fund companies through their portal more guaranteed returns on their investment. And then it kind of becomes more like other sources of capital. But it's there, and some people seem to do quite well on some of those platforms. That's it. I just put the link up again for the Innovation Enterprise Summer Entrepreneurship Program. If any of you are interested, I understand Tate has mentioned this before, so you might be aware of it already. But they'll be looking for, or they're looking for candidates already, I guess, for the next year. So if you like what you've done in this course and are thinking about taking it forward, we had a lot of fun dealing with the students last year, and quite a few of them are actually continuing to pursue their businesses now following that program. And it's very different. Again, it's not focused on a business plan. It's focused on, let's just validate this idea. Let's talk to customers. Let's see if there's any legs to this concept so that we can kind of push it forward. So that's a lot of stuff. It's been a few years since I've done it, so sorry it was a bit rusty. If any of that wasn't clear, happy to take any questions. I'll stay as long as you guys like till you get what you need out of the seminar. Maybe you can tell me about your ideas. Maybe just what you're actually thinking about in terms of your companies. You want to start? Yeah, please. Yeah.
If you were looking at franchise, like if Boston Pizza say
Yeah.
$1 million, like where would you go? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. So if you want to start a brand new franchise, is that what you're?
No, like
or,
if we want to franchise something like, I don't know, like open a Boston Pizza.
Yeah, there is actually a Canadian Association for franchises, and you can go on, and all of the listings are there. There's decent advice. Like most of them publish fairly extensive information on how much equity you would have to put in, how much support they're actually going to give, and you'd want to do a lot of diligence talking to other franchisees, in terms of their experience, because. Again, the franchisors are trying to make money by selling their model. You always have to continue to pay them a licensing fee and do whatever they say you're going to do, and some are better than others. So, but yeah, there is a full website that you can go to just to look at various options.
But like, where would you get that money? Like, if I don't have $1 million.
Yeah, so that's the problem. So they are looking for. So in that case, it would be. Some sort of a partnership arrangement. So you might have silent partners. You see that a lot with doctors and lawyers. 5 of them come together and they buy like a restaurant. So it's not maybe it could be a Boston Pizza. So they're listed as owners, but then there's kind of a owner operator kind of a person who is putting in the sweat equity, that sort of thing. So that would likely happen through personal networks, that people that know you. It'd be very hard to go in as a stranger and get people to invest in you if they don't know you, unless you could show that you've been in that industry for 20 years and run successful operations and that kind of thing.
Would that not be like pretty low risk though for a bank? They're investing in someone to franchise a location that's pretty well known.
It could be. There could be, and that would be part of their franchising package. Is they often help you do that. So they say that you definitely have to bring some of your own capital to bear, whether that's you or you in combination with a group of investors that you'll have to put something in. And then, how you finance other things, they could often put a package together and have relationships with a particular bank that works through their franchise network.
How does one go about meeting like venture capitalists or angel investors? Is it you just shoot off emails to people that you think? Or?
The referral system is much better. So again, it's a good question, by the way. A number of avenues. I would start with any of the kind of not-for-profits that are in your area. So, Saskatchewan engineers or whatever it is. They could link you to all the not-for-profits in the area. They have a network of individuals that they deal with. Build a relationship with them, build a relationship with a lawyer, an accountant, all of those people. And then when they say, hey, I've been working with this young hotshot, he's got a great idea, might not be ready for you yet, but can you have a conversation? Then they're more likely to take that call than if you submit something anonymously through the info at, which you never know if that ends up anywhere. Does anyone ever read that? None of the big venture capitalists ever publish their email anywhere. So you're gonna have to find someone that has one of their cards that can kind of make an introduction. So that referral network is very, very important. Or go to conferences. Go to conferences where they're gonna be. So for example, one of the best ones I go to is the Agritech Venture Forum. It's in Toronto every May. And a good swath of the investors in the agriculture sector from Canada, US, and even in Europe, we had some European ones were there. And that's where you start building that relationship, talking about your idea, etc. But at your stage, you'd want to kind of just get to know them, become friends. You're probably not ready for that yet. Once you've raised a few $100,000, kind of done a little bit, structured the company, then you might have serious talks about actually getting some investment from them. Yeah. We have one angel network here. It's still very small. Been working on it for quite a few years. The head office now is down in Regina. It used to be in Saskatoon. It's called the Saskatchewan Capital Network. So they're kind of the only local one. And again, they would have a process. Want to make sure that you're ready to actually pitch to those guys, but they hold networking events every now and then where you can just go to meet folks. Yeah.
You mentioned the diagnostic tools to kind of look at
Yeah.
stuff. What are they, or where?
Yeah, so I ended up essentially packaging them up for Manitoba. So as part of this Women Enterprise Center exercise, they kind of took over the tool. It used to be electronic, like it was on a website. You'd go in, you'd answer the questions, and it would spit out sort of this map, send you to tutorials. But when the foundation wound down, the whole website piece went away. So I turned it into a booklet. It's like a 120-page booklet. So I don't really have. They're the ones who are kind of using it as part of a program. And it really is, it's not something that you'd want to send directly to an entrepreneur. It's something that's better. It's like, you don't want to see the whole world at once. It's just too overwhelming. You kind of want to see it bit by bit and work with a coach to kind of work through it. But again, it was really just a trick in some ways, because, someone walks in, wants to talk about their baby. You don't just want to start shooting it down, right? You want to say, well, you're wrong. You got to do this. You got to do this. You're better off if you have sort of a quasi-objective framework to talk about where are you. Let's really now work together to understand what you know, what you don't know, what gaps do we have to fill in. So for us in creating the tool, it was more about training ourselves. Once we spent 9 months thinking about this stuff and setting out the stages, within an hour conversation of you, I'd be able to go up to the board. I'd be able to draw our matrix. I'd be able to say, I hear you're kind of here. You agree? I hear you're kind of here. You agree? Okay, now we're looking at the gaps. You need to now go out and you need to figure out how the heck you're going to market this thing, and then you would agree, and then we'd kind of move forward. So unfortunately, it's not something I can point you to where you can kind of go, but you kind of understand now. You've kind of had that glimpse into the future through some of these slides in terms of the things that you're going to need to do.
Some of those figures you showed us, like cash flow versus time, do you find that some of those differ with maybe software development?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, and that's why so much venture capital, well, I should say angel capital and venture capital has been going into software IT, because in those industries you can fail relatively cheap, right? So you kind of got to get to that beta app or whatever, and then either it goes viral or it doesn't. If it goes viral, you just add more services, more servers, more, the scalability model around it is actually known. So it just becomes a numbers game. If I invest in enough of these things, some of them are going to unicorn, others aren't. It's a lot tougher in my world because when I talk about natural products, that touches on just about any market sector, right? It could be a nutritional supplement, it could be a food ingredient, a feed ingredient, it could be a processing technology in the agri-value sector, it could be a bioproduct, it could be a green replacement, it could be a biosensor like a bacteria for monitoring water. So every one of those technologies goes into a completely different industry vertical. Some of them may take 10, 15 years to mature. So very, very different industries. So that's the reason why we exist, because virtually no angel capital goes into life sciences in general. And what does is skew towards pharma, well, not even pharma, but medical devices, because it's a cheaper one to get into and in most times less regulatory burden than a full-blown, pharmaceutical pill. But very little money going into the ag sector unless it's a drone or some kind of on-the-farm production software. It's great, it's fantastic, all that stuff is needed, and it's great to see capital coming in there, but we're here to say there's still a lot of biological problems to be solved too. It is complex. There are different business models. We're kind of the experts to help you walk through that. So that's the other benefit of having the angel investment fund that we have. We invest up to $500,000 in a company, always as part of a syndicate of maybe up to $2.5–3 million on the top, and kind of act as that lead sort of diligence steward. But yeah, some business models are just more common for those kind of investors because they can write a check for $20,000 and see if it flies or not, rather than my next step is a $10 million pilot facility so that I can make enough of this stuff to give it to customers to test to see if they want to buy it. And then if they want to buy it, then I need to build a $100 million facility to get the economies of scale to meet the cost that they're willing to pay for it on the other side. That's an almost impossible one to finance with an angel investment at the early stage. So again, this is why I show you it's complex. It's not just, there's nothing linear about it. There's nothing linear in time. It's who are you? What stage are you at? What do you need? And there's some kind of customized financing package that's more or less likely to be successful for you.
Talk about second stages for stages of business sales.
Yeah.
So after that, where do you see most businesses fail? Like in the early stages around so in this class, you spent a lot of time on problem definition.
Yeah.
Understanding what the problem actually is and you're actually the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see a lot of folks stumble?
At your stage, it's becoming too enamored with the technology is normally the stumbling block. So, so there's kind of two types of entrepreneurs, right? There's either the technical type where they just want to keep on spending and perfecting this thing because they like doing it and they like tweaking it, but totally ignore whether or not the market is actually there and can they actually make it and sell it. Or it's the marketing type that's already assembled the international sales force before they've ever figured out can they build the thing, right? So those are the two broad stereotypes of the different kinds of entrepreneurs that exist. What you need to do is put those two people together and make sure they're kind of balancing each other off. So I'd say the best thing you can do at whatever stage is to build that three-legged stool, right? The finance person, the more sales-oriented kind of CEO kind of person, and the technical person, the technical ops, to kind of balance each other out. You can't just do it alone, and you can't assume that some do make the transition, and some can learn. But you don't know what you don't know, and you always need to have different people, hitting you from different angles to make you grow, not just stay isolated in a lab. We're dealing with an entrepreneur now. He's been around for 12 years, somehow keeps on getting grant funding, has put a lot of his own money into it, and he just won't listen to any advice. He wants to be the CEO forever. He wants the $100 million plant. Doesn't recognize how complicated it's going to be. Won't listen, to me when I say, well, if you really got the best technology, why don't you go talk to those people in Europe who are spending $300 million on the same problem and license your technology to them? Why don't you get the farmers you're working with organized and create a co-op so that they all build your first prototype manufacturing facility together and they all share in the profits, and then you get your proof of concept that allows you to go off and maybe build your next stage plant later. Doesn't want to hear it. He expects that someone's going to write him a check for $100 million to build his factory. He's been doing this for 12 years. He's angry, doesn't want anyone to say no to him. So that's what can happen when you get your blinders on. You just don't allow yourself to be helped because you don't even know you need that help and you can't see outside that box.
Thanks, David. I think that was really useful. I know from our experience, it was very much so utilizing the technology working on always in business to succeed, and then starting to move back to manufacturing and partnering and back to moving like that's just before we get after a long way. And then that's also the times when you use to leverage other people's network, expertise, and knowledge and facilities. Actually reduce your risk drastically, which that's the vision.
Yeah.
I think the other part is I've said that for many students a bit. I want to emphasize to you is the importance of networking on business stuff. With your relationship and then early and then actually rely on them.
Yeah. Yeah, and make it a true relationship. So a good example is an entrepreneur that I started chatting with, back in early 2017, and he was always too early stage, but he'd keep sending me his monthly update, calling me every now and then, letting me know what he was doing. If I was in Vancouver and he knew I was coming, we'd go and have dinner together and just kind of get to know each other. And then suddenly in the spring, he sort of reached that point in his business where it's like, yeah, now I think we can actually consider it, and we just closed an investment with him. So it took, 2.5 years to get to that point. And I was honest up front that he just wasn't ready, but he didn't go, he just kept on keeping me informed and kept me in the loop. So it can take a while. And you guys are lucky. You have so much more entrepreneurial support around you now. There's so many accelerators. We finally have entrepreneurship, classes, and that kind of stuff that I never did when I was kind of coming out. So take advantage of all of it. This is really the time for entrepreneurs. And just use all of that information as much as you possibly can. All right. Sorry. Please do. Yeah.
One question on that interest. You talked about now as a minor entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Do you see it peaking and then maybe going?
Yeah, maybe. You know what? I mean, it is true to some degree. So this whole idea of everyone has to be an entrepreneur right off the bat, it is a risky business. Even if you know this stuff, you're still going to have high failure rates in startups. So the question is, how do you end up with better business in the end? Are you better off to get a job and learn a little bit about an industry first, so you kind of understand how the industry works, then you identify a gap, and then you transition into being an entrepreneur a little bit later. Maybe by that time you have kids and you have a wife and you have a mortgage and it's too risky. That's the danger of losing entrepreneurs that way. And maybe it's better to fail when you're young and you don't have any assets to kind of worry about it. But there's other ways of getting at it, and one could be through buying a business. Talk about franchising. There's lots of companies out there that go up for sale, particularly in rural Saskatchewan, right? A lot of family businesses, the kids don't want to buy the business or inherit it. So what a better way of becoming an entrepreneur than to team yourself up with someone who already has a successful business that will work with you for a couple of years, do some sort of a gradual buyout, and then you're an entrepreneur in an already operating business model. So that's another way of doing it too, which I think is far less risky, right? But it is true. There's not enough capital out there to make everybody their own business. It's a competitive environment. So either try, but at some point, getting some good experience might actually help you out in the long run. All right. Thank you. Thanks for coming up. Oh, thank you. This is a good stocking stuffer for my wife. I haven't started her Christmas shopping yet. Thanks. Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
For any students, we often
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I'll just wind this up.